Thank you. It's nice to be here with you today. My drive today wasn't nearly as long as some of my drives have been recently. I just got back from Norfolk, Virginia, and just in the nick of time before the snow starts flying, you know. I think I'm going to be home for a while now. So it's good to be here with you folks. Today I want to talk to you about standing steadfast in universal truths. One of the greatest gifts that spiritualism brings to us is our Declaration of Principles. In there we find universal truths. So what are universal truths? They're the truths that hold true for everyone all of the time, that spans time, immortal, and also spans all religions. Some of the universal truths that we know of, that we can find in our principles, we believe in personal responsibility. We don't believe that anyone can take our place and make amends for things that we've done. We believe that we're the beneficiary of our choices, be they good or bad, and that we get to choose. We have free will. We believe that we need to do our part to benefit for all the good and the happiness and the peacefulness that we have in our lives, and that we need to map our own course in life to realize these things. We believe in God's laws, which are the laws of nature. The first one who brought us that term, by the way, the laws of nature, was Aristotle back. He was born in 384 BC. So this is not something that's new. We've kind of coined the term natural law, but he was a biologist, and his comparisons between humanity and nature and animals and plants and so on and so forth led him to his understanding of natural law. We believe, like so many others, in the continuity of life. And one of the things that we can forever count on is life will always provide us with what we need, which doesn't always, well, sometimes rarely, is what we deem as what we want out of life. But we will get what we need. And this is natural law. We believe that intention is greater than result, and that interpretation of that intention lies squarely on the shoulders of the recipient. Has anyone ever experienced you set out with the best of intentions to perhaps help somebody, do something for someone, and it doesn't turn out so well because it gets misinterpreted and misunderstood? And so the best of intentions kind of backfire on it sometimes. But God, infinite intelligence, and natural law deems that it's not so much the end result that makes the difference as the intention or the motivation behind the action that matters. And we can't be responsible for how someone else receives that. So regardless of whether or not it turns out to be positive in nature or it gets misinterpreted, if your intention and your motivation is coming from the right place, you're in alignment with natural law. Natural law is perfect truth. Truth is an ideal or fundamental reality apart from and transcending perceived experience. She didn't get that either. I'll repeat it. Truth is an ideal or fundamental reality apart from and transcending perceived experience. Now we understand certain aspects of who we are and what we're about. We're spirit people. We're having a human experience. Right now we're processing through a very physical organ called our brains. And our brains, because of the limitations of being in our physical bodies at this present time, can only process to a certain extent. It's limited. And so based on that, and that's just fact, based on that, our perceptions are subjective, based on our understanding and how we're able to process. It's not our fault. I mean, this is what we've got to work with right now. We're in the physical body. Our perceptions are not necessarily universal truths, however. They may seem that way, but one way you can evaluate that and say whether or not this seems to be a universal truth or not is to say that if you were thinking what I was thinking, would your perception be exactly the same as mine? And would everyone's perception be exactly the same as mine? Across the board. Universally, not dependent upon religion whatsoever. And that's how you evaluate whether or not this is a universal truth, or it may be stemming from your own personal belief system, your own perception, which may or may not be correct. Now, I'll give you an example of that. I want to tell you a story. So, there was a guy on a very crowded subway train during rush hour in New York. Anybody been there? Yeah? It's pretty bad. Very crowded. And he had 3 children with him. And these children were running up and down the car and banging into people and hitting people's papers and notebooks. And this guy wasn't paying the least bit of attention to him. He just had his head down, totally ignoring them. And the people in the car are getting angrier and angrier and more upset, understandably so, right? With this guy who doesn't give 2 flips about his kids, who are disturbing everybody in the car. Until finally somebody says to him, "Hey, buddy, you know, your kids are totally out of control. They're being a menace to all of us. Won't you rein them in? Won't you stop this?" And he looked up and he said, "Of course," he said, "I'm so sorry. I was just lost in my thoughts. We were returning from the funeral of their mother, my wife, and I'm sorry, I just wasn't paying any attention to them. And I'll have them come and sit down right away." Now, what just happened? So the people's perception went from being annoyed and angry and upset, and everybody in the car thought this guy was just the rudest, most uncaring person on the planet because he didn't care about what those kids were doing. But then the people got the rest of the story. And what happened was immediately their perception changed from being annoyed and upset and angry to sympathetic, empathetic, and understanding. So this is what happens, and this is how quickly things can change when you get the rest of the story. Now, how do we know on any given occasion that we do have the whole story? We don't. It's our job to stay open and flexible and perhaps be, maybe this is what was meant by being childlike in nature, that we don't know. Staying in the question. No matter what it appears to be, no matter how much you think you've got this and you understand what's going on, and I know that this person is doing right or this person is doing wrong, and I know. No, here's what we do know. We know that we don't have the whole story. We know that there's a whole lot more that we don't know as compared to what we do know. More often than not, when you pass judgment on a situation or a person's actions, and we all do it, we're operating through our only ability to operate at this point in time, a subjective rather than an objective perspective. And therefore, we're seeing a filtered perception. The bottom line is you just don't know. I don't care what it may look like. I don't care what it may feel like. We need to stay open. Now, I'm not a student of the Bible. As a spiritualist, we understand the Bible to be a great historic document. We know that it was translated over 700 times. We know that it was written by many hands over a long period of time. But there are things in the Bible that are very pertinent and I believe are universal truths. One of them is found in Matthew 7:1. Judge not, lest you be judged. This is what I'm speaking about today. I'm speaking about staying open, staying flexible, and staying in the question. And saying, well, this is what it looks like, but there's a good chance I don't have the whole story. So what do we do as spiritualists committed to living in truth? Here's what we know is truth. And these are universal truths. And this is what we can stand steadfast with as spiritualists, desiring to stand in universal truths. Intention supersedes and is greater than outcome. If your intention and your motivation is in the right place, and you're coming from a sacred place within you, and you mean the best for that individual, however they receive that, if they misinterpret that, it's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to stand in your ground, stand steadfast in that universal truth of knowing that you came from an honest place. You cannot be responsible for another's interpretation or judgment. What they do with it is up to them. That's not yours to own. And it's not yours to direct either. We can only control our own thoughts and actions. We can only control our own. When you come from a right place within you, and you're working diligently to clean up your own house, which means you do the work. You do the work and you know what your shortcomings are. We all do. And you do the work and your intention is to clean up what's going on within here. What happens out there is will not only change because you're changing this and you're co-creating your outer world, because life happens through you, not to you. We're not mindless tumbleweeds out there. We have power, greater power than we know. So when we clean up our own house, and we judge not, lest we be judged, then we're living in accord with natural law. Judgment can only exist when linked with limited perception. And because we're subjective thinkers, perceptions can only exist in a limited form. You can only think in accordance with what your brain is able to process based on your experiences, right? Your environment and so on. Because what you think about it may be very different from what I think about it. That's why when there's something that happens and it's investigated, and there's 10 eyewitnesses, there's 12 different stories. When you master an understanding of differentiating between universal truths and subjective truths, subjective thinking, then you gain another pearl of wisdom that can be found in the Bible. John 8:32. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Go with God, my friends.